People love adaptations. Okay, that may not be entirely true, but taking something in one medium and changing it into another can be a fun and interesting process. Sometimes you get gems, like when they turn the Harry Potter books into a series of fairly decent movies. Or you get stinkers, like when they tried to turn Splinter Cell into a book. Either way, you're in for an experience when you either try to adapt something yourself or experience an adaptation. Besides video games, another medium I love is graphic novels. I've recently been getting into comics as a whole, so being able to read them bundled together is a lot easier for me. Plus, they look really nice on a shelf when they're all lined up. Whenever I browse my local bookstore for more, I will occasionally see a video game that ended up getting its own graphic novel, either being a direct adaptation of the game or a full-on original story or side story. I always try to pick these up when I see them, as they're usually pretty cheap when compared to the other books. I don't know if people generally just don't like video game graphic novels, if they're not as good overall, or if they're just specifically hated by bookstores, but any books based off of a game tend to be just a bit cheaper than your average graphic novel. This makes them easy to just pick up and read, as I'm not sinking $20+ into every one I buy. So today, I want to take a look at some of these video game graphic novels. We'll specifically be looking at the Metal Gear Solid Omnibus, Super Mario Adventures, and the Halo graphic novel. Without further ado, let's get into them. Okay, I have a confession. I've never actually completed any Metal Gear Solid game. I know. How can I call myself a gamer if I've never experienced Peak? Well, I actually recently bought the Master Collection with the intention of playing Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 for myself, but I got sidetracked with a playthrough of Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. I used a guide to get through the games, as there is no way in hell I am gonna figure out some of those puzzles, and I actually enjoyed my time with them. It was genuinely cool to see the evolution of gameplay and storytelling that took place just over the course of 2 titles. I was all set on playing Metal Gear Solid next. I played a little bit of it when I got a copy of it for my PlayStation, but I didn't end up fully finishing it as I just didn't have time. I got to the first boss and took a break, which that break has been going on for about 3 years now. One day I'll get back to it, but for the time being, I have this handy collection of comics known as the Metal Gear Solid Omnibus. The Metal Gear Solid Omnibus collects Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid Sons of Liberty, comic book adaptations of Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 respectively. Metal Gear Solid was written by Chris Oprisco and Sons of Liberty was written by Alex Garner, but both series were beautifully illustrated by Ashley Wood. Ashley's style complements the universe of Metal Gear Solid perfectly, feeling reminiscent of the famous key art done for the first Metal Gear Solid. The stories themselves are almost one-to-one retellings of the games. There aren't many variations between the story of the games and the story of the graphic novels, and that's a good thing. It translates fairly well to a graphic novel format. Because it follows story and dialogue so closely, it leaves little room for mischaracterization, like we saw in the Splinter Cell novel. I won't go over the story here, as you really should experience this for yourself. While the story of Metal Gear Solid is just alright in my opinion, the story of the second game is frighteningly accurate to problems we are facing today. I won't go into too much detail, and I'll instead just tell you to play it or read it. Trust me, I have more to say on the story, especially Sons of Liberty, but maybe I'll save that for when I actually play the games themselves. Overall, the Metal Gear Solid Omnibus is just a solid adaptation of the first 2 games. It's perfect for someone who maybe struggles with playing games or just prefers comic books. If you're a fan of the series, you'll also enjoy it for the very unique visual style. I would rate it a solid Snake out of 10, specifically his brawl render, because that one is just iconic. Now Mario is a guy who I'm more familiar with. We were buddies in college, he fixed my car once, he's my kid's godfather, we go way back. One of my first ever video game experiences was playing the original Super Mario Bros. With my dad on his NES. When I was younger, I was hooked on Mario Kart Wii. And for the longest time, I would tell people my favorite game of all time was Super Mario Galaxy. I would later tell people it was Half-Life 2 before I fully realized that I was just choosing those 2 games because everyone liked them and figured out my true GOAT was Black Ops 2. When it comes to other adaptations of Mario, I had watched some of the older cartoons and seen the live-action movie. I also saw the Illumination Mario movie in theaters and thought it was pretty alright. But the issue with a Mario adaptation is that he's like Mickey Mouse. You can kinda have him doing anything or put his likeness on anything, and it'll sell because he's Mario. Slap his likeness on anything and you'll make that sweet, sweet coin. That's what makes our next comic so special, however, as actual care and effort was put into it. The comic is Super Mario Adventures by Kentaro Takekuma, with art by Charlie Nozawa. Super Mario Adventures was a comic series that ran inside of Nintendo Power throughout 1992 and was later published in Koro Koro Comic Magazine in 1993. In 2016, it finally got a trade paperback English release courtesy of Viz Media, which is the release we will be looking at today because I don't speak Japanese. The story follows Mario and Luigi as they travel across the Mushroom Kingdom to save the princess. It starts with them going into the basement of Peach's castle to clean her pipes. As they are working on them, more and more pipes start appearing as Bowser's minions climb out of them to try and seize the castle. Bowser is back at it again and wants to marry Peach, to which Peach is obviously 100% against the idea. Bowser leaves and Peach pursues him with her army while the Mario brothers follow behind her. They then stumble across a Yoshi village and then meet someone named Friendly Floyd? Who the hell is this guy? Why is he here? Looks like a used car salesman. I'm sorry, but this just feels so out of left field. He's like a self-insert OC or like a Graggle Simpson kind of character. It wouldn't be a big deal either, but he's like with the group for a decent chunk of the story. It just feels so out of place and bizarre, like I can't get over this guy. Who are you? Anyways, Toad shows up to the Yoshi village to tell him that Peach has been kidnapped. Luigi, Mario, Toad, and fucking Floyd go to save Peach through a slightly convoluted scheme that involves Luigi dressing as Peach and lots of bombs. They rescue the princess, Floyd leaves, thank God, and everyone gets ready to head home. There's just one issue, however, as they can't get back home at the same time due to the pipe being way too high up in the air. Peach leaves and promises to send a rescue party back for them, but ends up getting captured by Bowser's minions again. The Mario brothers try to give chase to Bowser, but end up having to flee into a ghost house. Despite this whole section with the ghost house being like mostly filler, it is the most insane section of the whole book. How do they get out of this ghost house, you may ask? How do they, not die from the booze? Well, get this. They lure all the booze into the basement of the house only to reveal that they have switched outfits. Mario is now a psychiatrist and Luigi is a nurse. Mario essentially gives Big Boo some therapy and Big Boo reveals that his shyness stems from childhood trauma. In exchange for the help, they let Mario and Luigi go free. I don't know if this is a reference to like Dr. Mario or the author having a breakdown expressed through a fucking Mario manga, but it's bizarre nonetheless. Finally, the brothers end up at Bowser's castle and begin the rescue. Luigi goes downstairs to find the entire Yoshi village has been captured. Meanwhile, Peach is about to agree to marry Bowser after being put into a hypnotic trance. Mario bursts in and saves her before it can be finalized, and Bowser hides in the wedding cake. Just at that same time though, all the Yoshis that Luigi found come into the room and start devouring the cake as our protagonists safely return home. Bowser is fucking dead. May he rest in shit. After this is a shorter story that acts as a sort of prelude to Super Mario Land 2's 6 Golden Coins. We learn about Mario and Wario's relationship a bit as Wario invites Mario over to catch up. As Mario heads over, he encounters several bosses from the game but doesn't put it together that they're after him specifically. Once he gets to Wario's house, they end up fighting and Wario reveals that he is mad at Mario for always bullying him when they were younger, specifically how they would play games and Wario would always get the short end of the stick. Mario defeats Wario and apologizes, and they play cowboys once again, only for Wario to lose and become vengeful once again. These comics are a fun little read if you're a fan of anything remotely relating to Mario. Not only does it show a good insight as to how he may have been portrayed in Japan as opposed to America, but it's just cool to see them make an actual story out of something so basic. The comic is just one of those comfort reads. You're not here for an impactful story or meaningful lesson, you just want to see a fun adventure. Plus, we can now officially add Friendly Floyd to the Mario universe. I'm still waiting for his video game debut. Make it happen, Nintendo. Finally, we're going to look at a series that I have a personal connection with, Halo. Despite none of them being my favorite games of all time, I love this series dearly. Me and my dad would play the first two Halo games on the original Xbox all the time growing up. I would spend long nights playing Halo Reach with my friends over Xbox Live. And I vividly remember being highly disappointed by Halo 4 and the map called Forge Island, leading me to drop the series entirely until rediscovering my love for it with the Master Chief Collection. Through playing MCC with my friends, I found out that there was actually a surprising amount of supplemental material for Halo in other mediums. Some shows, books, comics, and more exist out there, and it got me a little curious. So when I saw a book just called Halo Graphic Novel at my local half-price books, I decided to give it a shot. And what I found was a fun little anthology graphic novel about the early days of Halo. This was actually a project that got pitched to Bungie by Microsoft, and they agreed, so long as they had creative control and first pick for artists and writers. They ended up choosing some fairly big writers and artists from the industry, some of whom were actually excited to work on the project. It would end up releasing in 2006 under Marvel Comics, and Bungie would later work with Marvel to release more Halo comics. But to see what secured them that deal, let's take a look at the graphic novel itself. The book contains 4 short stories with their own artists and writers, as well as some art pieces drawn just for the book. Each story has its own introduction that explains their connection and inspiration for the story. None of the stories focus on Master Chief, instead choosing to tell stories adjacent to the main story of the Halo games. Each one tries to focus on a different aspect of the universe that ends up making the series feel much more fleshed out than it did at the time. The first story is called The Last Voyage of the Infinite
Sucker,
which was written by Lee Hammock and drawn by Simon Bisley. It follows a side character from Halo 2 named
RTA's Vadumi,
as he leads a Covenant crew into the Infinite
Sucker,
in response to a distress call. While on the ship, he discovers that it has been overrun by the Flood and fights through legions of infected Covenant to get to the ship's control room. Once there, he sets it into a slip-space course to the current system's sun and escapes as the only survivor. Last Voyage does an incredible job at making the Covenant feel oddly relatable. While they are seen as the enemy throughout the games, and rightfully so, most of the ground troops are essentially the same as the UNSC, soldiers being given impossible tasks. It really gives them more depth than just the things you shoot at. The second story is called Armor Testing, and it was written by Jay Fairber with pencils by W. Andrew Robinson and colors by Ed Lee. It follows Master Chief as he drops down to Earth for a UNSC combat simulation to test the new model of Spartan armor. Of course, he aces the simulation, only to reveal that it was not in fact Master Chief, but Maria 062. Maria had come out of retirement specifically to test this armor for the Master Chief just in time for the events of Halo 2. Fun fact, they originally wanted to include this information in the original game, but chose to show Maria's test run in the graphic novel instead. Out of all the stories, Armor Testing is probably the weakest. It's a nice bit of world building and overall isn't a bad comic, but the other stories in this book outshine it. While the information it gives to us is interesting, you won't really care unless you're already a big Halo fan. That being said, I do like the style of the art, having hand-drawn visuals set over pre-rendered backgrounds. The next story is very interesting. Written and illustrated by manga artist Sotumi Nihei, Breaking Quarantine stars everyone's favorite cigar-smoking Marine Sergeant Johnson. The comic shows how he escaped from the Flood during the events of Combat Evolved. There isn't a single word of dialogue throughout it, instead choosing to only have sound effects, with those sound effects being written in Japanese. Its heavy focus on action and art works to its benefit, however, as it becomes one of the most memorable comics of the whole book. Not really much else to say besides the simple fact that it's just really good. Finally, the book ends on a somewhat somber note with Second Sunrise over New Mombasa. The story was written by Brett Lewis and illustrated by Gene Mobius Giraud, with Giraud agreeing to work on it due to his son being a big fan of the series. This story shows how civilians on the ground reacted to the Covenant's attack on New Mombasa. We follow a reporter who creates UNSC propaganda as they chronicle the attack in real time, showing how some citizens fought back until everyone was forced to flee, leaving the city in the ruined state we saw it in during the events of Halo 2. Second Sunrise over New Mombasa does a great job of showing just how horrible the Covenant attacks really are. We never get to see the effects of the war on humans as we are mowing down the endless hordes of Covenant during these games, so getting a glimpse into the atrocities they commit gives us some good insight. It does the opposite of what Last Voyage does, as it makes you feel justified for killing hundreds of grunts throughout the course of these games. The book then has some art pieces made by various artists from the video game and comic book industries. On top of this, each comic has an introduction from someone related to the creation of it that explains their reasoning and thoughts on each comic. The whole graphic novel feels like a passion project as opposed to a licensing deal. You can feel the love for Halo as a franchise oozing from every page. Overall, it's a good read for any comic fan, and a great read for every Halo fan. So those are some video games that have been adapted into graphic novels. Like I said before, I love reading these as it combines two mediums that I really enjoy, comics and video games. In some cases, they can provide extra lore or expand a universe that would otherwise not get that much attention. Other times, it might just be a solid retelling of the games themselves with some amazing art to go alongside it. I think it's best when you create something like the Halo graphic novel, a book that can stand on its own merits but is also a treat for fans of the series. I'm glad comics are now more mainstream than ever because it means we have more and more opportunities for graphic novel adaptations. Like in the hands of the right people, your favorite game series could get a comic to either add to the story or introduce the story to a new audience. And to me, that's beautiful. If you'd like to see me look at more of these, do let me know. I got plenty more I could talk about, both good and bad. Thanks for watching.